Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Our countdown did not count down. So we're just going to be present in the moment and welcome everybody to Becoming Quantum Conscious. My name is Bart Sharp, host of Becoming Quantum Conscious, and this is United Public Radio Network and UFO Paranormal Radio Network out of 107.7 and 105.3 out of the beautiful city of New Orleans, Louisiana. And I am broadcasting out of Austin, Texas, which is my home. And we're just going to have this lovely day with the theme. And oops, I almost forgot it. How to embody more of your soul. And really, it's like that's the process for everybody if you're on the consciousness trip. How do you become more inside of yourself, more present inside? And there's a lot of great ways people are doing that these days, from what they eat. I just had some amazing matcha drink from Neil Doomra of Third Eye Lounge in Austin, Texas, which is making me very present with myself and becoming a wonderful proponent of matcha these days. Great drink. And it embodies my soul a little bit because I'm more present in the functioning of my brain, uh, almost like the neurons are firing much more efficiently right now. What a high that is. Um, so, another way to embody more your soul is to let go of all the gunk that you've held not only this lifetime and other lifetimes. And there's a lot of ways to do it, and there's such uniqueness. And the guest that I have on today, Sheefra Blume, and I want to spell that name out, Sheer, no, Sheefra Blume, Sheefra Blume. She has a passion for finding what embodiment is. And she's been doing this all of her life. Some people, they just are born with an insistency to become more. And that's really explains Sheefra. And I knew that from right off when I met her in Austin, about somebody that was so passionate about becoming more and growing in soul. And this has been her life probably ever since as a child, to where she was embracing Jewish mysticism. She is Jewish, and that was what was presented, almost like spirits were coming in and saying, "Hi, Shifra, wake up. We got something to offer for you." And she didn't run in fear. She came to it with curiosity, and now has a commitment to helping others to find that in herself, to find a path that they can become more and embody more of their soul. So we want to just welcome Sheefra Bloom to the show. Thank you, Sheefra, for being here.
Hi, Bart. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it is. Um, I knew you were a powerhouse right when I first met you, and you still continue to be that today. And we were just talking earlier about what it was like to be Sheefra as a child, and spirit comes to you sometimes at early ages, and then you have a choice whether to run in fear or
Mm.
take the journey on. And can you just tell us a little bit about what your journey was as a kid to becoming an adult, and the process you've made?
Thanks, Bart. Sure, I will share a little bit of that. And um, when I was a kid, I was the kind of kid, and I'm talking, preschool age. I was the kind of kid who could see the energy in the room. So I could see all of it. Um, and I didn't realize when I was that young that that was different. because to me, it was just completely normal. It wasn't until, oh, I don't know exactly, sometime in elementary school, um, I remember I went to the doctor about it. To explain it, and, so let me give you a little story about it, if that's okay.
Sure.
Um, so one of my earliest memories ever, and I must have been 4 years old, was in preschool when we were all playing a game where we were sitting in a circle and we were throwing an imaginary ball around the circle, passing this ball to each other. Well, if you're someone who works with energy, as I am, then you would know that when you do that, in people are actually catching this ball of energy and throwing it and catching it and throwing it, you're actually generating energy into this energy ball. Now, people in the circle weren't doing it intentionally, but I was able to see a ball, and so um, I didn't realize while we were playing that I was the only one who could see the ball, but afterwards, when the game ended, the teacher kinda just tossed it away, and I watched it go into the closet, and it kinda hit a bunch of things, and it kinda made a little moment of energetic chaos, and I was like, "Oh," I was a little bit startled, and no one else responded. Um, and then I think that was the first time that it maybe seeped in a little bit that, oh, no one else actually was aware of it. This was just an imaginary game to everyone else, but it wasn't imaginary to me. Um, and then as I got older too, I would be able to see really a lot of the like congested energy, um, maybe I'm putting it in quotations, but like dirty energy or just, used congested energy in people.
Mm,
That, the energy that's no longer serving them. And
mm,
people release this energy in a lot of different ways. We release it when we're exercising. We also release it when we're feeling emotional. We also release it, when we're just really excited. So the memory I have of this, just to give one more story of this, um, and then explain why I went to the doctor and
yeah, and can you also share about a little bit about what that really looks like or feels like when you see
yeah.
that type of stuff?
Yeah, so I think this next story will help people get a more tangible understanding of it. So I remember I played soccer as a kid all the time. It was the sport that I played growing up. And so, you release energy when you're exercising and you also release it like all the parents and friends on the sideline that are cheering and they're feeling all the emotions, right? And so
Mhm.
I could see all of this energy getting thrown around. Now, here's how it feels. It felt to me as a kid, it was a little bit overwhelming because I could see it and I had these techniques that I would naturally do without meaning to, that I'll explain in a second. But what was frustrating as a kid is that there were things that I remembered, which later in life I learned, like, oh, that's a real technique. Of course it is, right? But there were things that I also didn't remember, like how to clear the energy out of myself properly. So, what I was doing as a kid on that soccer field, for example, was clearing the energy out of people. And it would be compulsive. I didn't mean to. But I would see it as this sticky gray green energy, and it would kind of get stuck to my fingertips, which is like how it would come out. And then there were different ways of clearing it that I did practice, but I was missing a little piece of it to really clear it fully. And so what ended up happening is it would actually get stuck inside of me, usually inside of my solar plexus. Um, and I'll explain what happened actually. And this is so fascinating. I realized, well, first of all, I went to the doctor and I said, "It feels like there's trash in my chest." And the doctor checked my lungs and checked my chest, and of course, I was very healthy. And they said, "Well, nothing's wrong with you," because I didn't have in my life at the time, anyone who understood this layer of life. And I had to find teachers later. So, I was coming in naturally, like I think there are many people, we come in with some kind of gift, and
Mhm.
many times the adults in our life don't have that and can't guide us, like the people around me, my teachers and parents, and even this doctor, they just didn't know what was going on, but it felt like congestion in my chest. And so then it was really until I graduated college. Well, I did have my first shamanic teacher when I was in high school. And I continued really just because it's who I was to practice and learn just by living.
Uh-huh.
Um, but as far as really getting answers to some of these deeper questions of how to work with energy and how that tied into my lineage of Jewish mysticism, um, those answers I really dove into more in my early 20s.
Hmm. Boy, that's incredible. And it really gives me perspective that maybe when I'm playing badminton against some of my more competitive friends who always beat me, they're much younger and faster and all of this good stuff than I am. But of course they come over to play because I'm the one who has a badminton court in my backyard. I can tie up their energy, and maybe I can get a few shots by them that get by them. Always, because it always makes this curiosity that I know that things happen in energy, and some people just freeze up in certain situations, and it just feels like it's an energy thing going on inside of them. And I know I've had it, and such that you can actually move and change that. And of course, if you're not doing it without permission, it's like kind of not the best juju to put on yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying this all in jokes, um, though it's tempting, that we do that. Oh, boy. It's the fun thing about energy work is that we're constantly opening it and facilitating it, and thus of us who do this as healers, we're always wanting to facilitate change. We always see the bigger picture with it all.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely for those listening, it's not recommended to do any of this without permission, but it is fun to joke. Um,
Yeah, yeah, we're doing this all in jest because it's kind of funny. Uh,
but
but
it's true.
where you are, you went to Jerusalem. You've gone several times as this is your pilgrimage place. What are some of the changes that Jerusalem has facilitated for you in this learning journey?
Yeah, sure. So if we're talking about my timeline, continuing on that, when I was in my early 20s, um, although I'd been again the kind of person who was already seeing and feeling and immersed in and working with energy my whole life. And like I said, I did have one teacher from a different lineage when I was a teenager. But it really wasn't until I went to Jerusalem. This would have been for the second time, um, when I was about 22. And by then I had had teachers who, for the past couple of years before that, um, had been learning and studying with me and teaching me mysticism and matters of the soul and incarnation and these things that I was able to learn a little more deeply. Um, but it's interesting, you know, what sent me to Jerusalem in the first place was my own health, my own desire to be healthier in my own body and be more comfortable in my own body, right? Because at that time I had really bad eczema.
Mm,
And so, even all of these physical symptoms, like you mentioned earlier about how sometimes people can kind of freeze up. That's something we can certainly talk about more if we go there. But for me, it was eczema, and that I had been to all the Western medicine doctors, and no one could help me. And so, part of going to Jerusalem, I found true healers, um, whose healing modalities were rooted in ancient lineage that happens to be my lineage, which was really special. Um, and I had a few teachers in particular that would work with me deeper with energy and energy work. And then I also had a teacher who specialized in what would be like traditional ancient Jewish medicine. Um, and that included a whole philosophy on healing in general and on, what is illness anyway, like the whole philosophy component. And then it also included, he taught herbal medicine and used herbal medicine, but there's also an emotional component and, of course, the energy component. And then very essential to healing within this tradition is the importance of our words and the language that we actually speak.
Wow.
And so those teachers I found in Jerusalem. And what's interesting is my sister was recently in Tzfat, which is the so I'm going to introduce a couple of terms. Tzfat, or in English it's called Safed. I'm going to call it Tzfat. It's in northern Israel, and it's considered the birth city of Kabbalah. So I'm just going to define what I mean by Kabbalah is essentially Jewish mysticism. It is the mystical tradition that I'm talking about. So if I
Okay.
say Kabbalah, we can get deeper into what that means, but for the simplistic version, I'm just referring to the Jewish mystical tradition.
Yeah.
And
And let's keep it simple.
yeah. So I just wanted to say, so this city in northern Israel where I went is the city for that, where all the mystics of old really came out with, all of the profound writings. And even to this day, it's a very mystical city. People pilgrimage there. It's a very holy place. And people, so my sister was recently there. And what's interesting is she said, yeah, I'm meeting all of these young women like I was, 10 years prior. And she said, I'm meeting all these young women here in Sfat who came here specifically to learn, Jewish traditional healing and Jewish mysticism. And they can't really find a teacher. And sure, there's places where you can go take a class, but to really find a teacher who will go the depths with you, that's what I did. But I didn't learn from one of the advertised programs. And
You just found somebody that felt right for you.
I truly found a teacher who lived um, traditional Jewish medicine.
And I want to clarify something. Uh, Traditionally, women were not to study the Kabbalah until recent years. That's correct?
That is correct. And I have two ways of explaining that or interpreting what that means. Um, but it is interesting. So traditionally, you would not study Kabbalah, uh, meaning this mystical tradition, until you were 40 years old. And even then, only if you were a man. And so those two things require two different explanations because there's something to it. But interestingly, I'm both younger than 40 and also a woman, right? And so part of that is why I'm able to also teach these concepts in a way that's much more accessible um, to people.
Mm.
Is because of the perspective that I do have as a woman who's under the age of 40.
Almost like a
However,
new consciousness is coming in. Would
and
you
a new
dare say
consciousness,
that?
I absolutely would, because a lot of what I learned, I already remembered. I would say much of what I learned, I already had remembered. And then I learned it, and the learning of it was simply a confirmation, like a go ahead check mark. Okay, cool. I didn't make this up.
Mhm.
um, but part of, at least in the past, and you're right, part of it is that a new consciousness is coming in and we are remembering. It is important, I think, to verify what we remember so that we aren't making stuff up. But part of the 40-year-old thing was that this tradition values the balance between the human and the holy, the body and the spirit. Many mystical traditions are all about how to ascend, whereas this tradition is about how to ascend for this explicit purpose of bringing more light down into the world.
I'm going to repeat that again. How to ascend with the purpose to bringing more light into the world.
Yeah, and I could say it a different way. It's all of these practices and the meditations and the light body and all of these very mystical things to go and elevate your consciousness. In some traditions, we want that so we can experience the bliss that's there, and we want to stay there as long as possible. But in this tradition, the point of going there and reaching that higher state of consciousness is so that we can take the wisdom gained there and bring it down into the most mundane parts of everyday life to
So,
elevate the everyday.
so it's a true culture of service. And we hear this so much in American society, at least I do with people. It's like, I want to learn all I can so I never come back to this godforsaken place called Earth. And this is the exact opposite of this. I want to learn so much so I can serve everybody in all my lifetimes.
Yes. Yes, it is
Wow.
about that. How do I bring in more holiness even to the darkest places?
Yes. And so um, to just kind of ask another question with um, the Kabbalah is kind of like a map in its most basic terms. And you follow what the map shows you of all the different aspects of living, and you use that to help facilitate more embodiment of a person's soul and their life through that map. And what's that like?
Yeah, it's a great way of explaining it and just simplifying. We called this show How to Embody More of Your Soul. And the Kabbalistic tradition does give us a map for how to embody more of your soul.
Mhm.
And what that map is essentially is um uh, you you can definitely ask me to go deeper if I need to explain something more deeply, but basically it shows us that the process of incarnation goes through four major stages. There's many sub stages, but four major stages that we call the four worlds. And then within those four worlds, um, there are 10 major steps, I'll say. There's actually more, but there's 10 major ones that are called Sefirot. But in English, these are, there's a couple of different ways to think of these steps. They are energy centers, and they are personality traits, and they are attributes of our soul, in that they are attributes of the divine, and therefore they're attributes of us because we are mirrors and microcosms, meaning mini versions of the divine. And
So, so when you look at somebody and you're looking at these energetic attributes, and being that you see energy so profoundly, can you see the stuckness in court with the Kabbalah as your aid to understand it? Is that what we're talking about?
well, yeah, actually. So this is where my work gets deeper than what you can find most anywhere else when it comes to this, because these energy centers are actually directly correlated to energy centers on your body. And nowadays, I use my hands to feel the energy more often than visually. But I can sense it and feel it and see it. Um, what I've done that I think is worth mentioning, though, is I've created something that um, is essentially a map where I explain the different 10 attributes, and
Mhm.
how people can know. Because here's the thing: is if energy is stuck, it's stuck in one of these attributes. And not everyone can see energy, and not everyone's interested in learning how to see energy, or it just might be far off from where they are right now. So what I've done is I've created a free ebook where I just go over how you can tell which of these attributes is where your work is right now.
Yeah. And you can find that on
So
sheefrablume.com, correct? Your website?
yeah, you can site sheefrablume.com. It's as soon as you go there, it's just a freebie, and it comes actually with a 20-minute intro to Kabbalah training as well. That's just a simple video where I go a little bit more in depth
Mhm.
about the map that we're talking about. And yeah, it's right there. It's the first thing. It tells you to pop in your email on sheefrablume.com, and I send it to them right away. It's totally free. So I mean, as we talk about it here, if people decide like, wow, I listened, but I forgot what she said, I just want them to know that they can go get that for free.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've gotten it myself.
Yeah, cool.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah. Um, so you've been doing this work with people and working in these four worlds. Could you tell me what the four worlds are?
Yeah, okay, let's get into it. I love this so much. Um, so the four worlds are essentially, let me back up just a little bit to explain what their purpose is on a more broader level, on a macro level. Um, is essentially when we incarnate. So we're talking about embodying our soul, embodying more of our soul so that we can be more of our full self and live a full life, right? So when we incarnate, it's the same process as the creation of the universe as incarnating ourselves. And that is the same process as bringing an idea or our own creative process to fruition, right? So it's as beloved, so below. The world, the whole universe comes into form in the same way that we incarnate, which comes into is the same way that our projects come into being. And so as the energy comes in, um, before we come into being, and I think the analogy of like a creative project, like someone creating a painting, right? If we are the painting of the divine, then we can use our own painting as an analogy. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So if we use the analogy of our own painting, before you even have the idea, all the energy that will eventually be channeled into the painting, it's like not even a thought yet. It's all just mixed into basically it's nothingness. All the potential is there. So then, in order for this infinite potential to finally become a painting or a person or whatever is being incarnated or brought to form, the energy has to actually constrict into these four stages. And so, what's curious to me, and in some ways relieving to me, is that it is absolutely necessary to like that feeling of disconnection is actually a little bit necessary to become alive, because we actually have to disconnect from the oneness enough, not completely, but enough to become an individual. Otherwise, we're up in the infinite potential, and there's no person, and there's no individual, there's no painting, right? So the four worlds are the stages that the energy has to go through. So the first world, that now we're here, the first world is where the infinite potential now comes into the world of belief. So it's called the world of emanation, which is the world of belief. And it's where that infinite potential is just like emanating out of the nothingness, out of the everything and nothingness. And it doesn't have any shape or form yet, but it's just like pre-thought, this belief that it could be.
So it's kind of like an energy center within the person, their of what they could incarnate and become this lifetime, and that could be their past lives, their ancestry, their genealogy, and all of and much more. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
all of that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's all the ancestral healing work and like generational trauma that can all get tied in at this highest level, which in Hebrew, it's the world of Atzilut, is this
Mm.
world of belief. So then from there, the energy condenses and becomes a little more dense into the world of thought. And the world of thought in Hebrew, it's the world of Beriah. And this is where your beliefs now actually become thoughts and thought forms and working. And again, you can kind of look at whether someone has a goal they want to achieve or a challenge or illness that they want to overcome. You can kind of identify by knowing this map which level and which attribute is the one that we have to address in order to, overcome. And so this next world is the world of thought. And those thoughts then become even more dense and they go into the world of formation, the world of Yetzirah. And this is the where your thoughts now come in and they become emotions and you can articulate them into speech. This
Wow.
is where emotion and speech. And then before you can have action, which is the fourth world, is Asiya, the world of action. Before you can have action, you have to go through belief, thought, speech and emotion, and then action. So that's why those four steps are so important in the process of healing as well as in the process of manifestation.
So
And then
they're almost like eons of thought that are within every individual, and they have different energies, and you're able to go in and see where people are stuck.
yeah, so we can go in from an energetic perspective, but also you can, I think that it's ideal to address whatever we're working on, whether it's
Yeah.
manifestation or healing, on all four levels, which is why we'll do things that address the energy, which is going, way up into the world of beliefs, really. And then we'll address things on the level of thought and do work with the inner critic and do work with thoughts. And then we'll address things on the level of speech and emotion. This is my favorite. This is the
Uh-huh.
story where we get into story and language because your language really is casting spells. So I want to define, because this is just so cool, the definition of what is a spell, right? So a spell, we're casting spells. Well, the definition of a spell is a word or combination of words of great influence. And so this tradition teaches, and this is in that third world of Yetzirah, of formation, is the world of speech and emotion. It teaches the importance of using our words because they do cast spells. They do create great influence. And the more intention and emotion you put behind your words, the stronger the spell, the more influence it creates. And so we can actually cultivate this and learn how to intentionally do this. And
Or
that
or
trickles into our
or
action.
a repetition of saying the same things over and over, like nothing good ever happens to me.
Right. And if there's emotion behind that, it's going to make that even stronger,
Hmm.
right? And it does. And then it trickles up the up the ladder of the world and down the ladder of the world. So if someone says nothing good ever happens to them, and it becomes even more powerful because there's emotion behind it, and they're just repeating that over and over. Okay, they're speaking it, but it's also a thought that they're thinking, and it's becoming solidified as a belief.
Hmm.
Now, maybe they have that belief, but they're choosing, you know what? I'm going to think other thoughts. Oh, that's really hard. So I'm going to make it easier by practicing speaking an alternate story. And then they think, well, I don't really believe it. Great. So then we have to tap into the emotions and get emotion behind an alternate story. That's
Yeah.
how we change the belief. It's
Yeah.
it's hard work, but it's also so simple to do when we actually know how.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having a map that shows you the different parts and pieces, so you can almost use it as a checklist.
Exactly. And then so within each of those worlds are those 10 attributes that we spoke of before. So
Yeah.
you can really get in there and get specific. And that again, that's what that the ebook that I was talking about can do for people. Um, but it's very fun because it's on the one hand, it's this age-old question. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, there's 4 steps. There's 10 sub steps within each step, and it becomes fun when you actually know what to do.
So we were talking about this earlier. It's like, Sheefra, I want you to kind of explain this like Mr. Rogers would explain it, which you're doing so well. But it's kind of like, the 40 steps to greater consciousness, you know, in a plain, simple method.
Kinda,
Mr.
yeah.
Rogers would say. It's wonderful. And once again, it has so many applications. I mean, I've been working with this person recently who has tremendous childhood traumas, like wasn't welcomed as an infant
Mm,
coming into this world. Maybe the first couple of weeks because they thought he was interesting or like it's interesting to have a baby, but then their own personal issues came on to hand that were so overwhelming that they pretty much ignored the child all of his life. Um, and so that sadness is so perpetually strong in there. But there's something really interesting in this person's life in that he is so powerful in that first house. There's this huge karma that is so strong and powerful, and it seems to have carried him through a lot because, so many children that would be unloved would find a way to get sick and die. It's intolerable for a child to be unloved, in my opinion. And they find ways to get sick or they, you know, fall into a hole and die or, they run into a car or something, but they'll
mm.
find a way to check out. And this is just my own personal opinion. Um, but sometimes they have something in that first world that is so stronger. And I don't use the Kabbalah myself, but it's funny how we're all using different maps that have a lot of the same characteristics.
Yeah. Well, and I think that points to the underlying truth, behind some of these ancient systems that wow, they're leading us to the same places. They're saying something very, very, very similar.
Yeah,
Um, Chinese medicine and Ayurveda both have a lot of direct correspondences to the Kabbalah system.
yeah. Do you have any idea where the Kabbalah came from?
Yeah, so I wanted to clarify because it's just Kabbalah. It's not the Kabbalah. And the reason is because, people would say, "Oh, the Kabbalah, isn't that an ancient book or something?" And while there are core books about Kabbalah that are often, referred to, there is no singular book. Kabbalah actually means to receive. And so that brings us back to our topic because it's to receive what? It's to receive, to receive life, to receive presence, to receive more of your soul, to receive the gifts that the divine is bestowing upon you.
Right.
And therefore Kabbalah was a received tradition that was then put down into many books. Um, and it's a vast tradition
And very old.
and very old.
Do we even know the origins? I mean,
Um, So I would have to study the history more specifically,
yeah.
to really give you that information. But I do know that, like I was saying, in Sfat is where a lot of it was written down. And the exact year, I cannot remember off the top of my head. But that's when it was written down, which
Okay.
isn't when it began. And they
Right.
and this tradition would say that the origin, it's well, if you're asking when the origin of when it was taught as such is one question, but the origin of it itself, this tradition would teach is the origin of creation itself, because essentially this tradition is giving you a map for creation. And so even the language, um, of like it would teach that like the Hebrew language is a vibration that's embedded in how creation comes into form. That is why the third world, which is the world of speech, is the world of formation.
Wow.
Um, right. And so it depends what you mean by that question, because in some ways it was,
Yeah, it's always been a curiosity to me about the origins. Um, and a really wonderful author named Lars Moll. He's probably the most gifted metaphysical teacher out of Denmark. He's kind of their man, and justifiably so. Wrote a book called The Law of Light, in which he explains that Aramaic
Yeah.
was the language that angels taught humans.
Well,
And
and
you
that
know, it just really brings up a curiosity. Was Hebrew taught to humans for from some other gifted uh, beings? And you know, this can be brought up comfortably because we are on UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
well, this is great because
105.3 and United Public Radio Network 107.7, which we just love all of this stuff. And we're also on Roku, Facebook, and YouTube. I just want to throw that in. So,
oh,
with
thank
that
you.
intriguing question, you have any response?
Thanks, Bart. This is exciting. First of all, a quick comment about the Aramaic. A lot of the Kabbalistic works were written in Aramaic, and
Wow.
a lot of what I studied when I was in SFAT was actually in Aramaic, and I had a teacher who could help translate it for me. But this is great. This question of like where did it all come from in the paranormal, and even like when did these teachings originate? Because even if it was written down later, a lot of the magic there's different kinds of Kabbalah and magical Kabbalah, these magic traditions, um, which is what I'm very interested in, is actually the least written down. It's almost not really totally possible to write it down um, because of the intricacies involved. It really is better as an oral tradition. Um, but these were received, as we said, and we can go all the way back to Egypt and beyond, before Egypt too, but especially you can go back to Egypt since today is the first night of Passover, and then we're talking about going through Egypt and then going to this mass um, oh, what would you even call it? Mass elevation of consciousness that happened to the Hebrew people in the desert at Mount Sinai. I think that's really relevant to our conversation
It is.
because they were practicing a lot of these, what I call magical Kabbalah, but maybe it wasn't called Kabbalah, but the Hebrew people were practicing a lot of this um, even before the receiving of the Torah back in Egypt, and then they left Egypt, which is the story of Passover, and received the Torah. And they say it was about 200,000 people, if I have the number correct, in the desert who actually had this group experience of an elevation of consciousness where they saw God. They had an interface with God, and it says that it was so intense that they actually saw the sounds and they heard the colors. They heard the visualizations because everything just became one, and truth was revealed in that moment.
Hmm. It was beyond sensory explanation.
It was beyond what we currently experience when we are in form. And yeah, there
And if you do not know Mount Sinai, of course, this is where Moses received the Ten Commandments, and you know it's an uber powerful place. But in modern terms, in the I guess the more the New Age metaphysical, and those of us who study ley lines, and if you're in Europe and in the Middle East, and you start studying ley lines, you'll see that one of the great power sources that power up so many other power spots, Sinai is one of the central ones. It is a very amazing, bright energy. Um, when I stay in France, which I'll be leaving in a few weeks, I'll be connecting with Sinai. It's very prevailing there.
mm,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's and what a gift. I meditate with Sinai energy all the time. And you know, it really brings up a thought to me is that, you know, as you've studied this stuff and you've studied it intellectually, but it's been in your genetics and in your whole embodiment all of your life. And maybe part of it is really learning what your own cellular memories have to teach you.
Yes, I remember when we met, you saw my connection to Sinai. You actually brought it up.
Oh, it did?
Yeah,
Oh, you're a Sinai girl.
you've brought it up a couple of times. It's interesting, and I do. I have a connection to Sinai, and yeah, it was my ancestors were there at
Mm.
in that moment of of having this group experience in the desert, and I believe that my soul was also there.
Wow. If you don't know about my talents and abilities, I feel energy of other people. And sometimes when it's just really strong, it goes into my face and it, you know, look like I'm eating a lemon. That's just what happened. Yeah, you were there, hon.
Yeah.
Maybe many times.
And there are questions, again, talking about like, well, where did it come from? Where did this what did Moses actually receive there? What actually happened? And there's a lot of theories, but what's it's it was something very powerful that the Hebrew people then carried with them. And there are a lot of instructions in the Torah for creating an ark. And it's so specific to house this very sacred energy and um, that was received there on Mount Sinai, and then carried it with them through the desert, and eventually put this ark in the temple in Jerusalem, which is currently not standing. It hasn't been standing for about 2000-ish years. That's not the exact number. And for those who don't know, even though there's a lot of synagogues in the world, there's only one Jewish temple, and a lot of the Jewish religion cannot be practiced except for in the temple. And it has to do with what was received at Sinai, and it has to do with the ark. And the ark was put in the center of the temple, inside what we call the Holy of Holies. And so I just want to explain how powerful it was. And the thing inside the Holy of Holies is that which Moses received at Sinai. But I want to explain how powerful it is, because it's really an energetic vortex that then is put in this other vortex on the earth in Jerusalem to really create an alignment of energies. But the ark in the Holy of Holies could only be accessed on the holiest day of the year and only by the high priest. And if if the high priest was not completely spiritually pure, then he would, on that day, he was fasting, he would go into the Holy of Holies, and they would tie a rope around his leg just in case, because if someone would interface with that energy and their vessel wasn't ready to hold that energy and they weren't completely spiritually pure, they would die. And in fact, we learned this in this week's or this past week's study. We learned of a story, and I forget the guys' names, but the story goes that there were two guys, and they got, they were drinking and they got drunk, and they challenged each other to go into the Holy of Holies, and they didn't survive. And that is the power of the energy that was given at Sinai, is that this very pure spiritual energy. And that was what was given to the Hebrew people, and they all experienced it and then were able to continue living,
Well,
even though they
they must,
weren't. Yeah.
but they must have been there at the right time, at some special time, but also as a group, maybe had a very special moment or epiphany that they were not separate from each other.
I believe
And
so.
in that power, maybe they could have received something so pure of essence. I meditate with Sinai, as I said earlier, and it is the most intense energy.
Yeah.
And you really do need to come with it with a reverence and respect, with no ambition,
Mhm.
no ambition to take it and, for example, monetize it,
Mm.
something, really ego dominated like that.
Mm.
It's a very special place. Uh, and you can understand why in the Raiders of the Lost Ark,
Yeah.
all the Nazis got, French fried on that one because this is a very special. And if you looked in your heart and soul, do you think it's still alive today?
I absolutely do. I absolutely think it's, I mean, what do you mean by it, I guess, just to clarify?
The Ark, the
Yeah.
Ark.
No, I do. I think it's still there. I think it's in tunnels underneath the temple, underneath Jerusalem. And I think it will eventually come back, out of the tunnels, and it'll have
Mm,
to be at the right time.
mm,
Um, you know, it's interesting, like, talking about Passover and then leaving the desert and then talking about the ark, and the ark is hidden right now, and, um, there's this concept that's a very Jewish concept that's also very much related to Passover, and it's the concept of leaving bondage, leaving slavery, and going into freedom, and we can talk about it on the literal level, but it's also very much applicable to our lives today as an analogy. Um, and it's not even meant to be a metaphor. It's literally every single day we get the opportunity to leave slavery and become free. And this is actually in the daily prayers. The daily prayers are a substitute for the daily sacrifices in the temple since there's currently no temple. So instead, we do daily prayers. And the daily prayers, um, every single day, we remind ourselves, today I leave Egypt. And Egypt, in this case, is a metaphor for slavery. Today I step into freedom. And people will go, why are they so obsessed with Egypt? That was so long ago. And it's because it's a metaphor and it's actually today. It's not remembering then. It's actually how, in what ways am I still enslaved, whether it's, through my own thoughts and emotions and past
and
trauma.
right, it's kind of like, are you willing to leave all your distractions behind? Maybe your cell phones and computers, to where you know you step beyond your obsessions, you step beyond your ego, and you start to understand what it's like to be embodied whole, which takes us back to Kabbalah consciousness, that the whole map is flowing and it's included in your life and you're aware and conscious of it.
Yeah.
And if there's anything, we got about 2 minutes left, and I needed the last minute to sum up stuff.
Okay.
Um, any summary, or would you like to just mention about how you serve the world? Or
Yeah. Thank you, Bart. It's been really fun chatting with you. And, in conclusion, yeah, we do get this map for healing, and addressing healing is what I do in my work and how I serve the world. And I help people really to let go of the stories from the past that aren't serving them anymore. And I use all the different modalities and things that we've talked about here, but it's essentially, um, being able to overcome the limiting beliefs and cycles of sabotage, whether they're ancestral or just, more from your own life, so that we can achieve the things we want to achieve, and so that we can heal and let go of what's not serving us. And I'd love to invite people to my website, sheefrablume.com. Um, I do have a free ebook they can put in their emails. They'll get an intro to Kabbalah and a ebook explaining this a little more. And then there's a few different ways that they could work on me that they can check out if they'd like. But I always love being in touch with my community. So people are very much invited to reach out. It's Sheefra Blume, SheefraBlume, and it's the same on Instagram.
I really appreciate you mentioning that and sharing all of this great information with you. I can vouch for Shifra. She is a major, passionate powerhouse in the Austin, Texas community that connects worldwide. And it's just wonderful. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Shifra. And check her out. Um, and we are at National Public Radio Network, 107.7, and UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3, having all of these wonderful shows on the radio, but also on YouTube, Facebook, and Roku. And so you can join in the chat there and be a part of the program. And next week, we're going to have Fraka Future. And the title is How to Activate Your Innate Ability to Sense Energy. And it will be profound because Fraka is a very special human, much like Shifra is. So I just welcome you to come back, and we'll see you next week. Many blessings to all. Bye for now.